My guest on One of a Kind, Gerhild Krapf, is a well-known concert organist, a lawyer, artist, wife, and mother. Gerhild received an undergraduate and master's degree in organ from the University of Iowa, an Iowa law degree in 1985, and an executive MBA in 2004. After receiving her law degree, she worked 10 years for the UIHC hospital director, John Colleton. Following Colleton's retirement, she moved to central administration and is currently an administrator to the dean of the law school. Gerhild learned music from her father, Gerhild Krapf, who was an extraordinary organist and composer. He founded the organ department at the University of Iowa School of Music. Gerhild Krapf generously hosts an organ recital once a year to benefit community social services. In 2013, the concert benefited the 1105 Project. More than 100 guests attended the concert and generously donated to this worthwhile organization. Gerhild has a twin sister named Gerborg and twin daughters, Jessica and Nicole. Your story begins in Maryville, Missouri in November of 1955. Tell the viewers a bit about your first family and their influence on you.
Well, my first family, meaning my siblings, so my twin, Gerborg, my sister 2 years younger, Uta, and my brother, Rainer, who was born about 5 years later. And of course, my parents, Gerhard and Gertrude, but she goes by Trudel. Well, I have to say that at the time we were living in what I considered this very harmonious, little isolated group, I had no understanding of how insular we actually were. But my parents had just come from Germany, and they brought with them all the German treasures of art and music and philosophy and history. And so they also valued the German language, so that was my first language. And so we kind of lived as this little unit, kind of an island, until we ended up going to school. And then we learned English. And then I have to say, later when I went to Germany, when I was 16, expecting to find the same kind of culture, I realized we were more German than the Germans, because they had become westernized and we had continued in this kind of, which I consider very, very precious surrounding in which we, without realizing it, learned so much at the dinner table. Or, you know, my dad would have visiting guests and they would come and talk about history. And
was this in Iowa City? Or
this was in Iowa City.
In Iowa City.
Yeah. Oh, am I supposed to be back just to
No,
Maryville?
no.
So really, for me, I also learned music. It was just part of my daily experience, listening and hearing my dad talk, and he was a passionate man. And I just never realized at the time how fortunate I have been in terms of that, well, tremendous dedication that he modeled, and that he also had towards our family. As insular as we were, you know, we spent Sunday afternoons playing games with my dad. He'd work very, very hard, but then he'd always...
The university, he founded the organ department.
Here in Iowa City, yeah.
Like I said in the introduction.
Yeah. And
was he the first one to come to Iowa to do this?
Yes, Jaime Waxman brought him, and there's a funny story, to me funny, about the first years when he was here. There were no organs, so he was a consultant for a couple of churches, and then they ended up having decent pipe organs, Gloria Dei being one of them. And so my dad taught students by renting time at these churches. But that's not an ideal way to have a department, right? So he was trying very hard to get some organs purchased, and he had made plans, and he had been shot down any number of times. And finally, it was a situation where he wanted to buy these organs from Cassavant in Quebec, and the exchange rate was very advantageous at that time. And he really was bound and determined that if he didn't get it now, you know, when he's going to get it. So he went into Sandy Boyd's office, who was the provost at the time, and Sandy listened apparently, and then said nothing. And my dad left, and he thought, all is lost. And then Sandy gave him the money for this.
For
the organs. And so in our household, Sandy Boyd has always been just revered.
Absolutely.
And
Many people revere him.
I just add one more thing. When my father passed away in 2008, there was a memorial service or a recital. And Sandy was kind enough to speak a few words, and he made, I think, the greatest joke. He reminded everyone of my dad's passion for organs, and he said, and you know, when he came into my office, there was no resisting him. I had to give him those organs. And he said, but then Gerhard left his rose garden, and he went on to teach and found a department at the University of Alberta.
In Canada.
And he said, little did they know they too would have to buy him organs.
And did they?
They did. Oh yes, they did.
I love it.
Yeah.
How did your mother? You said before the interview we were talking that she was born in England.
No,
she was born in Germany and then moved to England.
Yes.
And then how did she and your father meet?
Well, okay, this is kind of an unusual story. So my father grew up in Germany, and you know, it was the horrible Nazi period. His father was in the confessing church, so he was a minister, and he was among a few people who were working against the regime at some risk to themselves. And I'm always sort of glad that I can say that, because I don't know if I would have had the courage, you know. But my dad was drafted when he was 16, was on the Russian front for 3 years, and then, although the war was over, they didn't know it was over, and so he was illegally captured and spent 3 years in Russian prison camp, and he should never have gotten home. But there was a strange quirk of fate in which the Russian prison camp had 3 categories of prisoners. The healthy ones who worked in the sugar beet factories and the coal mines, and they built roads, etc. And the medium weight prisoners who could do light work. And then the dystrophics who had lost too much weight were going to die, and so the Russians didn't want to spend any more money feeding them, so they sent them home, believe it or not. So they had this train that was boarded the prior night, and then the Russians had this paperwork, and there were supposed to be however many bodies going back. And my dad, in the morning, as the train was to depart, was raking gravel. He was in the middle group. But 5 people had died in the night, and they needed their paperwork to be accurate, so this Russian 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 get on the train. And my dad was one of them. And I find it just affecting to this day, you know?
Yeah.
And so he takes the train to Hof, Germany. Everybody thought he was dead. And he called his father, and he said, you know who this is? And no, I don't know, said this old man. And then my dad said, it's your son Gerhard. And you know, he said that he just started blubbering.
Yes.
And so my dad said, I'll be home, I'm taking the train, whatever the train was. And of course, all the people coming home traveled free. So he gets to the closest train station, and he's got these wooden shoes, and he's walking home, and the streets are lined with his choir members that he had conducted welcoming him home, you know. So he walks down to the pastor's home, the parish where his parents are, into the back garden, and on the bench waiting for him are his parents and this young woman who is Trudel, my mother, who had been brought into the parish to help because she was a nurse, and she my dad's mom had been ill, and so she needed help. So that's how they met.
It's about what, 1945?
I think it would have been
46?
48 maybe.
Oh, 48, okay.
Yeah. Or even, 48, I think.
And so they met.
So they met, and my dad, of course, was, a lot of the returning soldiers ate too quickly right away, and then they died. So my mom was a nurse, and she made sure that he didn't eat, you know, just soups first and all that. And so she said that, they met that way, and my dad's mom thought this was going to be a good thing, and she sent them out in the garden to tend the vegetables, which my dad hated to do. And then there's a divergent story here in the family lore. My dad always says, well, I asked her to marry me. I took her on the motorcycle. I took her out to the park and I asked her to marry me. And she said, forget it. And my mom says, oh, he didn't say that. He did not. Anyway, who knows what the truth of it is. Yeah. He had, missed out on a lot of schooling because he was gone, and he thought he wasn't good enough as a musician. He had been an organist and he had conducted, but his teacher was very much of a taskmaster, and so my dad really thought he can't study music, he'll have to study linguistics. And he told his professor that, and the professor said, man, are you nuts? Music is your God-given gift. And so that was like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He went to school.
And then how did he happen to find Iowa, or did Iowa
here's the weird thing.
Found him?
Well, first he went in as an exchange student to Redlands, California.
Okay.
And that's when my mom went to England. So then he ended up in Maryville, and then he went to Laramie, Wyoming, and then I think Iowa found him, actually. I think.
Well, aren't we glad? Aren't we lucky? Aren't we fortunate? And I'm you too. Glad. And you've been here for these many years.
I love this place. Yeah.
Here he gave you this gift of music, and I've heard you play, and it's such a treat to hear you play, Gerhild. But what made you decide, I want to go into law school? Where was this shift? What happened?
I'm not sure I ever decided anything consciously. Okay. I mean, that's not quite right. But I mean, I love music. That was always what I wanted to do. But I started my master's degree, and I had a number of personal issues that interfered with my. I think I had actually had an unhealthy relationship ultimately with music. It was almost like it was a way of punishing myself. I was too rigorous. I don't know if that makes any sense. Too intense, and I used it as a way of, you're not good enough, and that's not. So I quit. I dropped it for a while, and I think at a certain point I thought, well, you have to make a living.
Sure.
I mean, and I realized making a living in music at that time would have been a big challenge, and I didn't want to struggle all the time. So my uncle, the man who, my mom's sister Paula came to Iowa City, and she married Don Borchardt in later life when his wife died. Don was a lawyer, and he was a school board lawyer, and he always told me, you and your argumentation, you'd make a great lawyer, and I always thought, forget that, never. And then in the end, it just...
So did this job, once you finished law school, did this lead to you working for John Colleton?
Yeah.
And so what was your job description, and what did you learn for those 10 years?
Oh, well, the thing is, it's such a crazy thing that I even got that job. I had worked at the foundation prior to going to law school. I was a supervisor for the secretarial pool. And I had to go to some conference, and John Colleton was sitting next to me on the airplane.
Okay.
He was charming, and I don't know why I thought I could just write this man a letter after law school and say, I have a law degree. I'm not going to hang out a shingle necessarily. If you can use some help, I'd love to work for you. And he responded, and he remembered me, which I just can't even believe. And they just happened to have
an opening,
a need. They were at the time going through a legislative battle. I don't know if you remember that the Indigent Patient Care Program had the OB aspect of it, and there were a number of legislators who were convinced that this was not fair to women to bring them to bring them away from their home. Anyway, so he needed someone to help with preparing legislative analysis and that kind of thing.
So what did you learn from him? Because he's
I learned so much from him.
Successful career.
I learned so much from him. First of all, he is a master psychologist. He is able to assess people quickly. And he never told me this, I just watched him. And he would charm people. I mean, he had a way of finding what would interest them, and he wasn't being fake, but he would talk to them first about whatever it was, and then he would come around to the issue that was at hand. And he did it with great skill. But what I learned also from watching him is that he was a master of quality control. You know, here is this director, he's doing all this stuff, but he would call the emergency treatment center and act like he was a patient and find out for himself how are they
doing.
He'd walk around the halls, he'd know everybody's name. He was so wonderful to the staff, but you know, if something wasn't going well either, he'd take note.
He's a perfectionist.
He was a perfectionist, and he expected us to be. You know, he had a team of people who had to rely on one another, because guess what? If he wants this and you can't provide it, your buddy better give it the time that you need to get it to him, because next time it's going to be you that needs, you know.
Yeah, right.
But I think the thing I really value the most is that he was an objective person who could entertain any ideas. He didn't have an ego. He wasn't a narcissist that was threatened by any other viewpoint. So the team and he were able to consider all manner of ways to deal with a given situation, and it was very inspiring, and you knew you were doing something important, because for him the patient was what mattered most.
Came first.
Totally.
Came first.
And so, you know, I mean, it was a great opportunity for me.
So when did music start coming back into your life, and when did you decide to perform for the public? Now, I'm going to have Bond edit some of your organ music in the beginning of the show and at the end of the show, so our viewers can hear you play. And I thought that would be a nice introduction instead of using our usual music. But so when did you decide to perform?
I had been performing. This is kind of. I was married to a trumpeter, and I had stopped organ solo performance, because I just never, somehow I had this emotional, I just hadn't worked through this thing, but I started accompanying him on piano trumpet recitals. And then he had, took a developmental leave, and a former student of his lived in our house, was teaching in his place and lived in our house. And this is crazy, but this guy said to me, "Gerhild, why don't you play?" And I said, "Well, I read this Hermann Hesse book, you know, the Glass Bead Game, and there's the old man, and he pretty much says, you know, it's the process. It's not the final outcome, it's the process." And he said, "You have it all wrong. You have a gift, and you better, do this." And he dragged me down to the music building. I mean, I didn't even know him that well, and he said, "You're gonna play the organ, and we're gonna find some trumpet organ music, and we're gonna play." Anyway, that's what happened.
That happened,
and then the first time I performed again was, there's this little photo, 1995. It was a celebration for Del Dissehorst, who was my teacher.
Okay.
And the woman who was in charge of much of the organization commissioned a piece from my dad for organ, and she said, "Gerhild, I want you to play it." And I said, "I don't want to play it. I haven't." And she goes, "You're going to play it." So these two little angels,
a lot of people pushing you.
Two little angels
Yes.
for me. I mean, and then I started. I loved it. I love it.
Yeah, I know you do.
But I just had a roadblock somehow.
Sure. And then you got involved in letting people come and maybe make a contribution to an organization. That happened later?
That happened, I think, I can't remember, 2003 or 2004. I'm not sure what year. But my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And that was greatly upsetting to me.
Yeah.
But I think now, at least he didn't, go from one day to the next. And I had this notice, he's not going to be with us, right? And that motivated me, because I wanted to study some pieces with him. The great organ works that I had not played yet, I I decided I'm going to program.
Sure.
And I'm going to let him. And it was really a special time because he was still able to, well, music stuck with him for a very long time as something he could process, but he was very involved in every recital I would do, and I could feel him in present with me. You know, he'd keep track, and then, you know, I'd send him the CD, and then he'd give me a critique
of it.
It was so cute. Very generous critiques, though. I mean, he was a very generous soul.
That's wonderful. I'm so happy. Are you going to continue? Are you going to have a concert in 2014?
Well, here's the fun thing. Well, this is like something I didn't plan, but I mentioned the Clap Hall organ, which my dad designed.
And you brought a photograph of it, and they're going to insert it into this interview.
And because of the flooding at the music building, a new building is being built, and that instrument, for whatever reason, is not going into the new building. So it was donated to St. Andrew Presbyterian Church.
That's right.
And that is where my dad was an elder. So it's kind of lovely in that sense. And also, they're building a new building that will have much better acoustics than Clap Hall ever did. So the organ will probably sound better than it ever has. And the organist there, Matthew Penning, asked my teacher, Del Horst, and me if we would give a joint recital as a fundraiser in fall.
To move the organ to the St. Andrews?
Well, it'll cost $400,000 to get it revoiced and installed.
So this is
we're doing that November 9th.
And where will it be?
At First Presbyterian Church.
Great.
And at 3 p.m. And we're going to do a 4-hand organ piece at the end, which is crazy. So we're just going to be really
something
fun.
To look for. I'll go home and put it on my calendar. Oh, I think I know the answer to this, but I always ask my guests who or what has had one of the most major influences on you.
In terms of, well, in terms of everything.
I mean,
think
obviously your father.
Yeah, it's my dad.
Your father.
Is the person.
Yes.
I think I've also been influenced strongly by socially committed people. I mean, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean,
sure.
I didn't know her, obviously, but I am very affected by people that have remembered that not everyone, you know, comes into the world with a silver spoon in their mouth.
Sure. Well, that's wonderful. Besides music, I think people would be surprised that you have taken up ceramics and drawing, and you brought a wonderful drawing of your husband, Michael Brow, and you also illustrated a poetry book for children and wrote the poems. And would you read one of the poems? Do you have a dog? Because this poem is about a dog.
I have many dogs.
Oh, you have many dogs.
I have had, but this, in fact, is based on Sam, our current elderly gentleman, who is a rescue dog.
Okay.
And you will find out what the annoying feature of this gentleman is.
All right. Would you read it? And then they'll see the illustrations that you drew for this book.
I'd love to read it.
Okay.
This one is called A Riddle. There are several riddles in this little book. High and pointy is this thing, wiry, bouncing like a spring. First a whack right in your face from this thing at quite a pace. Then a turn and whoop it goes, this one landing on your nose. Now the coffee cup is near. It is treasured, old and dear, sitting on the coffee table. Please protect it if you're able. No, the side it marches on. With a whoosh, the cup is gone to the floor and smashed to bits. My, oh my, this gives us fits. What is it that's so destructive and so often interruptive? Side to side, that thing does flail. You are right, it's Doggy's tail. And Sam's tail has broken more wine glasses than I can tell you.
That's great. And so, when do you find time to do this? And I know you're in a drawing group. You get together with some other artists. And
well, I should back up and say that one of the things this poetry book also kind of is rooted in what my dad used to do, because there's a poetry tradition in his family. And so, you know, if there's somebody's birthday, he'd write a birthday poem. So when he died, I kind of started doing that. So it's something. They're not great poems. They're doggerels. I mean, you know,
sure.
they're just fun things. So I just write them every now and then. And this book just, I don't know. I just about 2 years ago, I was on an airplane actually, and I just had these
Started
little
doodling?
little ideas, and so I don't know why, it just wanted to come out.
That's
So
wonderful. I want to ask about your daughters.
Yes.
And they're twins, and,
Yes.
and your twin sister,
Yeah.
and you have a brother, and a
one
younger
other little sister, yeah.
Okay, what are they doing, and where do they live?
okay,
Start with Jessica and Nicole.
Jessica and Nicole. Jessica is a geologist. She got a master's in geology from the University of Iowa, and I got to watch her defend her thesis, which was like the ultimate for mom, listening to her speaking a language that I couldn't understand anyway. And she married her a TA who was there. She never took a class from him. They didn't do anything wrong, you know, but he was also a geologist. And they live in Champaign-Urbana, and they have jobs, fortunately, at the Geological Survey based at that university. And Nicole is a graphic designer who designed this little poetry book. A lot of the organization and thinking is due to her intense occupation with this. And she spent some time looking for full-time graphic work, just doing freelance work. She worked at the mill for a while. But now she has a job at ProTech Medical. That's a full-time with benefits job.
Wonderful.
And she lives with her partner, Scott, in Iowa City, so I get to see them.
Good.
And my brother, Reiner, left Iowa City some years ago, and he lives in Livingston, Montana with his wife, Julianne. And my sister Uta, 2 years younger than I am, lives in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. She's an artist, and she teaches.
Runs in the family.
Well, she's really, and I mean, I'm a, what do you call it, an amateur,
Yes.
and she's a professor of art. Actually, she's retired now, and I think they've actually moved to Marfa, Texas. She and her husband, who's also an artist. And then my twin, Gerberg, studied piano when I studied organ here at the university. And after that, when I went on to do graduate work here, she was told by her then teacher that she should go study with a special artist, a pianist in Germany. And she went, and then she met her husband there, and she had a family, and she never came back.
She never came back. Did she?
So-
But she comes back to visit.
She does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you're married to Michael Brau.
Yes.
Who is an excellent photographer.
Yes, he is.
And you're not going to take that up along with your
No. You know, the thing
piano,
is-
organ,
That's
drawing, ceramics.
I'm a great admirer of photography, but I've never actually. We get drawn to different things. I think.
Absolutely. So, in your spare time, which I'm sure you don't have much of, what's on your nightstand for a book that you're reading, or that you want to read, or can't finish, or can't put down, or?
Well, I love to read Dostoevsky. I mean, I love psychological novels. The book that's actually currently on my nightstand that I have to finish is by Gary Fetke.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called Public No More, and it's a book about the fate or the current situation with public universities who have, less and less public monies. And public no more because there's less and less money going to support these, and there's consequently a problem with access to universities because the tuitions go up. And so he has some solutions about, if we can't change this, what do we do as a university?
Is this book for academics, or is this for the
It's
general
for
public?
general public.
General public.
It's written by him and another gentleman. I'm sorry, I don't know who it is, but it's so it's two highly knowledgeable economists, and I think Carol, also his wife, participated. She's given a lot of credit in the front of the book for helping.
So that's on your nightstand.
Yes.
And my last question, because our time has run out, what do you like? Well, I think I might even know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask any. What's the best part of living in Iowa City? Do you like?
Well, I love that it's right, next to the cornfields. You can get out in 2 minutes. It's got wonderful people, intelligent, interested, caring people. It's got wonderful culture opportunities and beautiful delightful. I love to cook. You can get beautiful food at the farmer's market. It's just, I just can't think of anything not good about Iowa City. Quality of life is superb.
Good, and we're glad you're here.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
And thank you for being a guest
No, it was
on
my
One
pleasure.
of a
It
Kind.
was really fun.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Gerhild Krapf. Many of you have been fortunate to hear her organ recitals that are open to the public, and the performances raise money for community service projects. Gerhild is a lawyer, musician, artist, writer, wife, and mother. Words used to describe my guest are superb musician, tenacious, commands and exudes excellence, a hard worker, and a perfectionist with an empathetic inner core. Gerhild Krapf is one of a kind.